Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Florida-friendly landscaping educational program. Today, I've invited, again, my partner in crime and in education, Dr. William Lester. He's going to join us on this talk about just a few of the invasive plants that we find in Central Florida. There's lots of them. There's plenty, and the ones we're going to discuss, though, what we're going to concentrate on are the ones that, not the ones that we all know are, the bane of our existence and we don't want anything to do with them. The ones that people kind of fight for to have in their landscapes and kind of are in invasive plant denial. And we're going to discuss a little bit about that because they are pretty. Absolutely, they are pretty, but they are pretty darn invasive. I am Lily Browning. I work for Hernando County Utilities in the water department. This is my email here. If you'd like a PDF copy of this program when we are finished, just email me. I'll be glad to send that to you. This is also being recorded, so it'll be available on Facebook within an hour or so upon us finishing, and it'll be on Hernando County government YouTube within the next week or so. Send all the really hard questions to Dr. Lester's email at wlester@ufl.edu. He works for Hernando County Extension. My program that I utilize is Florida-friendly landscaping. And of course, everyone who works for UF works for the extension here in Florida. They all recognize and go by these 9 principles, but I'm the main outreach person who tries, to bring them to the public. So these are the 9 principles, and the ones that we'll cover today in our program are right plant, right place. Kind of actually, that's going to be flipped to wrong plant, wrong place. And believe it or not, this is also managing yard pests responsibly, because invasive plants are yard pests. So the question out there is, there's such a thing as bad plants. The next few backgrounds are going to be some of those really invasive plants that nobody would want in their yard anyway. Behind us here, we have air potato. We know that that is a big problem here in Central Florida. We wouldn't want it anyway, but we're going to get to those plants that you might want to fight Dr. Lester and I about. Are there bad plants? Dr. Lester, do you know of any inherently bad plants?
No, every plant exists for a reason. They all have their special place.
Right, but the problem is that they get removed from their special place and put in a place where there are no natural checks and balances to keep them under control. So therefore, the definition of an invasive species in general is an organism, meaning plant, animal, fungus, or bacterium that is not native to the area that it's in, and that has negative effects on the economy, the environment, and possibly human or animal health. That's the definition that we are working with. Now, Dr. Lester wasn't even aware of this. He was vaguely aware of it, but he didn't know the details. So I've done some research. We used to refer to these plants as invasive exotic plants. And basically, people from the University of Florida got together. I got this out of the Journal of Extension, Bill, where you can find, they said, let's all have common jargon to avoid confusion, what we are talking about. So they created, these, I think there's like 7 terms that we should use when we are discussing invasive plants. So, the definition of native is a species that occurs naturally in a specified geographical area. You want to get even more specific, As to timeframes, they've settled on calling it native if it was here prior to European contact. Now, things naturally move around. Plants naturally move around. Plate tectonics. I mean, if you want to go way, way, way back, you know, plants have moved around. There were humans here moving plants to a very small extent. You know, seeds may have been stuck on a woolly mammoth or in the droppings of a woolly mammoth and got moved around, but nothing like since European contact, when we've been just go, go, go ever since then. So a non-native is a species that does not occur naturally in a specified geographical area. If someone did not bring it there, it would not be there. Introduced is a species brought on purpose or intentionally or unintentionally by humans to a new geographical area, not something that an animal may have carried or deposited, but introduced by humans. Established means a species having a self-sustaining and reproducing population in a specified geographical area without humans making that happen. I mean, they may have brought it. This applies to both native and non-native. If humans introduced it to begin with, and they don't have to do anything to keep the plant going here, then it's called established. Now, we have 3 more definitions. What's of invasive? What does that mean? Broken down into 3 parts to be considered invasive. It has to be a non-native. An invasive has to be a non-native to a specified geographical area. A. B, that was introduced by humans, intentionally or unintentionally. And C, does or can cause environmental or economic harm to humans. That's the definition of an invasive plant. A nuisance plant is an individual or group of individuals of a species that causes management issues or property damage, presents a threat to public safety, or is an annoyance. And a nuisance plant can be a native or a non-native. So if we got that straight, if it's a native that's, you know, taking over an entire area, that's a nuisance. It's not invasive. Invasive is only for non-native. Now here's a new term I wasn't even familiar with, which was range change. It's the circumstances of a species' current or existing, that should say range, sorry about that, growing, shrinking, or shifting over time. This can happen to native and non-native species with or without human assistance, meaning this certain plant used to grow in this area, and for whatever reason, climate change, utility change, you know, they built a housing development there, you know, something like that caused it to change. It doesn't, you know, grow like it used to there anymore. All those definitions, Dr. Lester, what would you say is a weed? We didn't use that term in any of those definitions. What is a weed then?
A weed is just a plant growing in a place where you don't want it to be growing. And that's it. Many plants, you know, one person might think of it as a native plant. Another one thinks of it as attracting pollinators, so they plant it deliberately in their garden. Somebody else may think it's a weed. If it's growing in my next door neighbor's lawn, they may think it's a weed. St. Augustine grass up north apparently is considered a weed in northern lawns, whereas down here it's desirable. You will have a St. Augustine lawn, and that's what you want to be growing there.
So yes, and this is my saying at the end here, a weed is a matter of opinion.
Yeah.
And some, Jim Mall from Pasco County, his line is, a weed is a plant dealing with an unhappy person. So it's, here it says it's an ambiguous term. It is really, it's relative, whether it, you know, you just don't want it to be there, therefore you call it a weed. And that's why we don't use that term when we're talking about invasive plants, because they are beyond weeds. And some weeds, some people's weeds are some people's wildflowers. So that's why we are avoiding that term. Now, all of this, why should I care? What does it matter to me? What grows where? This is another really invasive species in the background. That's Kogan grass. That's another one that we know nobody is in favor of having in their yard. They just make good background pictures and to remind us of the various different invasive species that we have. But why should you care? What does it matter to us? It has some ecological impacts. They do compete with native plants for resources. Many of our animals need those native plants to survive. They alter naturally occurring fire patterns. You know, they could cause more fires, or there's some, you know, all of Florida is a fire maintained wilderness, and it really, you know, changes everything about that. It can alter the movement of water bodies. We're not even going to touch on aquatic invasive plants today here. That's a whole other conversation that requires its own class. It can change natural habitat composition, reduce biodiversity. That's basically what it does. It's a plant gone wild, so you end up with a monoculture, which is never a good thing. Again, potential to create monocultures. And what is a monoculture? It's just one thing growing. Or it accelerates the process of sedimentation or the settling of particles in water. That's ecological. What about economic? It can clog drainage canals. That's going to cost a lot of money. Increase potential flooding, increase erosion. And some of these plants were put on purpose to reduce erosion, ended up doing the opposite. They cost the state of Florida about $100 million a year to manage. They reduce recreational opportunities in our wild areas. They do negatively impact crop production, and they can reduce property values. So what is this other invasive species in this picture, Dr. Lester?
That looks like a Brazilian pepper.
Yes, it is. Now,
and we do have them in Hernando County. They grow mostly over on the coast, and they cause a lot of problems with coastal ecosystems. They push out the native mangroves, which are very, very important for fisheries, you know, the little baby immature fish and crabs and scallops and everything else. I'm not the marine biologist at the office, but I know that it causes potentially a lot of problems over on the coast.
Yet, beekeepers love the Brazilian pepper because apparently it makes great honey. So that's the issues we get into. As we said before, there are no bad plants. You know, there are plants that have good qualities. It's just when you look at the big picture, it is affecting the ecosystem of our waterways, and that's affecting ecology as well as economy. Because, you know, there's a lot of economy based on our coast. So there's a like a watchdog group out there. Bill knows them as the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. We used to call it FLPC, but remember, we're not saying exotic anymore because apparently that's too confusing. So they've even changed their name to the Florida Invasive Species Council, which is pretty much easier to say as well.
Yeah.
This is a watchdog group. They don't have any legal authority, but they are a group of many groups that keep an eye on these plants and, you know, keep track of what they're doing, so that eventually, you know, plants that start out being watched by this group saying, "Ooh, I'm watching you," they may end up on a federal or state prohibited plant list. But these aren't there yet. We're not to those categories yet. So this FISC group, which used to be FLPC, they have a category 1 invasive plant, and that means that plant alters native plant communities. They've seen it happen, they know it happens. By displacing native species, changing community structures or ecological functions, or hybridizing with natives. That might be something some people never even thought about, but that occurs as well. This category relies on the documented ecological damage caused. Have to prove this has happened. They also have category 2, which isn't quite as bad as category 1, but probably everything in category 2 is working its way up to category 1. It has goals. They have increased in abundance or frequency, but have not yet altered Florida's plant communities to the extent shown by category 1. They may become a category 1 if ecological damage is demonstrated. Some of them, maybe they just don't have enough documentation, done yet. But they're well on their way to being a category 1. The other categories, as I mentioned, there are state lists. There's the Florida Noxious Weed and Invasive Plant List. I always like that word, noxious. It's like, ew. This plant is determined to be a serious agricultural threat in Florida. That's where the economy comes in. Or it has a negative impact on plant species that are protected under law. Or if the plant is a naturalized plant that disrupts naturally occurring native communities. There's also another list. The state of Florida has a prohibited aquatic plants list. And as I said, that's a whole nother talk. And the USDA has its federal noxious weed list for the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Federal Service. Turn that around. Noxious weed program is designed to prevent the introduction into the United States of non-indigenous invasive plants. So if you've ever been to, out of the country and there's certain plants or even fruit they won't let you bring over, the little beagles in the airport may find them, in your suitcase. These are the reasons. I will tell you, if it's on the Florida noxious weed list or the USDA federal noxious weed list, they are prohibited to buy, sell, or transport. That's going to come into play later. The ones I showed you, air potato, Brazilian pepper, Kogan grass, they're on at least the Florida list. You cannot buy, sell, or transport them. But that's not the plants we're going to talk about. And that's why we have named this pretty darn invasive, because Dr. Lester and I have had many conversations with people. When we bring up a certain plant has invasive tendencies, what do we hear? But it's
pretty, and there's butterflies on it, and it looks very nice in my garden.
Yes. And what else? What do they do?
Oh, I'll make sure it doesn't spread.
Right.
I'll keep it contained in just my yard.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about the ways where that's fairly impossible. This is number 1, and we're going to get to this at the end, but maybe we'll just cover it because I know it's on people's minds. Dr. Lester, why can I go into a store and buy this?
You would be surprised, out of all these different invasive plants, how many of them are barred from being sold. So most of them are not prohibited legally. So technically, I could sell Mexican petunia plants on the street corner. There's no law against it. And many of these plants, some of them you can even go to legitimate nurseries and still purchase.
Mm-hmm. Because
But
they're
these
not
are all
on that state noxious plant list, at least not yet. So it is not illegal to buy, sell, or trade or transport them.
Yeah, there's very few plants that are on the federal list of prohibited plants.
Right. But this is on fists. I wanted to say plepsies. Fists, category 1, which, remember, that means it's been shown to, be a problem, documented problem. The Latin name of this plant and some of the other plants that we are going to cover keep changing. The taxonomists out there are they're just wanting to change names of plants all the time, and part of why it's becoming difficult to categorize these plants is that hybridization that we mentioned. if it hybridizes with natives and becomes established, and then, you have a whole other ball of wax there. But generally, the Ruelia simplex, although the Latin name has changed many times, the good thing about our Mexican Petunia is the risk of hybridization with natives is not very likely. There we go. Just lost that word. It's not likely to. So that's one good thing. Yeah. But look what happens. If you think I keep my Mexican Petunia in a pot or in my yard, it doesn't get out. Here's two places in Alachua County where it has gotten out. All that ground cover that you see in both of these pictures is Mexican Petunia that has gone wild. When good plants go wild, that's what happens. First time is at Hogtown Creek in Alachua County. First slide. I had no idea, Bill, that there was actually a place in Gainesville called Hogtown. I thought that was a made up.
No, I've heard of it before, and
Uh-huh.
I was not aware that there were such large areas that were covered with it.
And here we have it right in Paynes Prairie, which is a very, very, very large state park. But see where all this ground cover is Mexican Petunia. I've seen it with my own eyes, not these places, but I've seen in Brooksville. When I used to live right in, the city limits of Brooksville, there's a wooded lot behind me, an undeveloped lot. And I would go walking back there, and especially along the ditch line, I saw it was overtaken with Mexican Petunia. And I did not know of any particular neighbor that had it. So if you say you keep it under control, you have no idea how it's spreading, usually by birds, but we're going to find out that is not the only way this spreads. You have no idea what's happening miles and miles and miles from your house, where it, could become a big problem for our natural areas. And this doesn't have any particular great wildlife value at all. Now, there are sterile varieties that the University of Florida has even created. But if you see here, and that's probably what you'll find in the big box store. I've seen purple showers in the big box store, and they, then they'll feel it's fine because it's a sterile variety. From reading this that I pulled right from a UF publication, to me, sterile variety just means it doesn't produce seeds. But, well, look what it says right on here. If you are growing the sterile cultivars of Mexican Petunia, still manage the plant in your landscape responsibly. Do not dispose of plant clippings where they could root and spread uncontrolled. So what would you say about that, Dr. Lester?
Well, I know that some people would go into a yard like that and trim and prune and take all the clippings to the empty lot right across the street and dump them there. That's a really bad way to spread a lot of different plants and help them get established, in empty lots and wild areas. So it can happen. I've seen it. There are areas in Weeki Wachee, if you drive down the street, you can tell who's been trimming their yard and dumping it in the woods across the street because all their landscape plants are established in the woods across the street from them now.
Well, to me, if it's, you bought a sterile cultivar, but you still have to be concerned, even though they're not spreading by seed, that they could spread by clippings or the roots. To me, that's still, a plant of concern. It would just be easier to have a plant that you don't have to worry about. Now, when I bought my house 15 years ago, luckily I was dealing with a very, very small area. That area right under the light in the garage, at the garage, where it's not paved, and so we're talking about like a 2x3 area where the builder put this Mexican Petunia. So I decided, and of course I didn't want it there. 4 years of pulling up. Luckily, I had a very, very small area to manage. So you can imagine if you have, a much larger area, what a task you would have. So, and also what we're going to do here, since we're mentioning these plants that might upset you, because we're telling you the truth about them, we're going to offer you some other plants that, you can think about replacing that are kind of similar, if that's a look that you're going for, or else just replace them with something totally different. Purple coneflower will certainly give you, that purple color. But here's another Ruelia, a native Ruelia, doesn't grow as tall. It's Ruelia Caroliniensis. And I happened to see yesterday that our friend Frank Galdo put this on a native plant group. So I told him, stealing your picture, Frank. Thank you. I was looking for that. Kind of has the same kind of look. It just doesn't grow as tall, and it's a native, and it has good, value for the pollinators. Lantana, I'll let Bill talk about it, but all I'm going to say about it is what we hear from people, but the butterflies are all over it. And look, Bill, you may have noticed it's a different Latin name again. These taxonomists are very busy lately.
Yeah, I've always known it, this species as Lantana camara.
Well, now
So
it's
they added
Calico Camara.
a little bit.
Yeah.
So, but this is every time I look on different Facebook gardening groups, this is, everybody will post a picture of one of these and they say, what is this beautiful plant growing in my yard? And half the people who respond say it's invasive, it's terrible, get rid of it. The other half say it's beautiful, it's wonderful, butterflies and bees land on it. I grow it in a pot in my yard so it doesn't escape and spread. And usually the discussion goes downhill and things get nasty sometimes. This is a really aggressive invasive plant. And the problem with this species of Lantana is you can see these very, very pretty little clusters of multicolored flowers. When they're pollinated, they form little berries. They turn into a little black berry, and those berries are eaten by birds. And now birds are going to fly far and wide. And when they poop out those seeds. And these plants will end up in forest areas, preserve areas. Every empty lot in my neighborhood here in Spring Hill is filled with them.
Yes.
So these things, even if you grow it in a pot, if you keep it in your backyard, that doesn't matter. They will spread, they'll get around. They are pretty, but they are very aggressive. They grow very, very fast. They grow very large. And I know that because I work with people with Florida forestry, this is one of the plants they struggle with a lot in Florida park areas and state forests. And the state spends a lot of time and effort and work and money trying to control plants like this out in all of our forest property. So it's a really bad one.
And even for pastures, because cows love it, it tastes good. But
yeah, it's a whole different ball of wax if any of you have any kind of pasture land or farm animals, because it's toxic to farm animals, toxic to humans also. You obviously don't want to eat this plant, or if you handle it, make sure you wash your hands well. Keep children and dogs away from it. But this is a really bad one that if you do have farm animals, you have to be extra careful controlling, because it is poisonous and it can and has killed
cows,
horses, cattle, and that's a little outside of my area of expertise. I'm not sure exactly what animals it is toxic to. If you ever need more information about that, contact us. We have Agent Laura Bennett who deals specifically in that area, and she can answer those questions.
But are the butterflies all over this? Yes.
Oh, sure. Butterflies are attracted to it.
You got to remember, your children might be all over candy as well. That doesn't mean it's the best thing for everyone. Some of the replacement ideas, I have this beautiful blanket flower, this Gallardia here. It, has a similar look in coloring, but also there are native Lantana that you can look for. and I just lost the name of the native lantana, but just make sure it's a Florida native. If Rita were watching, she would tell me. I'll get it somewhere in the in the program.
It's the Pineland Lantana, and it has yellow flowers.
Yeah,
And does very well here in Hernando County. It grows well in high, dry areas like we have here.
right. Now this one I added because I've been hearing more about it lately. People will say, what is this that I have here in the Helen Coe family? Now there are millions of Helen Coe plants.
Yes, there
Helen
are
Coe,
thousands and thousands.
yeah, but this mother of millions, there's a clue. If something is named, its common name is something like mother of millions, that might start you thinking, oh, that doesn't sound real good. And this is a cross. Mr. Houghton apparently created it. It's a category 2, so that means they're keeping their eye on it. And it's a hybrid that was produced by Mr. Houghton in California in 1935. You can see all the little, points of seeds where it grows. If it's coming out of a concrete highway or whatever, bridge, whatever this is on its own, that's another, point to stop and think like, oh, that might be a pretty aggressive plant. Here are the places it's been vouchered. When we say vouchered, that doesn't mean it was in my mother-in-law's yard in a pot. That means I've seen it growing in the wild, with no human intervention. You can see how spread around in the state it's been vouchered. That doesn't mean it's not in our county right here. It just means
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, that
It
just
is.
means no one turned it in to say, that I have found this growing wild. So the way it's spread across the state where people have, turned it into the USDA or wherever it is that you voucher it, I would say then it's everywhere. I don't think it jumps these counties. So that's another, with all those seeds and everything, just, yeah, be careful. Here's some replacement ideas. You can get the same look. I don't find this a particularly attractive plant, but
No, not my favorite either.
yeah, but some people like how different it is. Here's kind of the same red spiky look, if that's what you're looking for. The red salvia is native. The rest aren't native, but they are Florida friendly. Doesn't have to be native to be well behaved. Native is always best. And then we have what we call well-behaved non-natives. So hurricane lily, the fire spike, the pentas, they all certainly are well-behaved. Better options. Now this became a discussion with Dr. Lester and I this week. This Calico Flower or Dutchman's pipe, because it was a matter of confusion even for us. And we're supposed to be the plant experts here. You won't believe how often we get confused. But so we were confused here and had to do some research. Again, they have renamed it to this littoralis as compared to the elegans, but you could find it under either name, this Calico Flower. It's a category 2. That means they're keeping their eye on it. It's a carnivorous plant, which is kind of cool. Comes from South America. By the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences in 2016, they already said it's a high invasion risk. But where the confusion comes in is there's a native Dutchman's pipe that's very important for the pipevine swallowtail. But yet on the other end of the scale, you might say, well, maybe I'll keep it around just in case it's that native. But no, because the non-natives are toxic to the caterpillars. So, could be a huge problem. We just said they're carnivorous. The pipevine swallowtail has evolved. Their caterpillars have evolved to not get stuck, in there. But the non-natives are a lot bigger and harder not to fall into the trap. and they're toxic. They can cause cancer and kidney failure in humans. I don't know who volunteered to find that out, but that is an issue. So what happened was I have this growing on my crepe myrtle. It's using my crepe myrtle as support to grow on. It's been the 3rd or 4th year in a row. It's come up. I keep pulling it. It keeps coming back. So I finally asked Dr. Lester to send these very pictures here to the herbarium at the University of Florida. Let's find out. I want to know, is this the invasive or is this the native? Although I had an idea. And here's the research I did before we got the herbarium's answer. You know, I'm thinking in my mind, and this might be the steps you have to go through. Did I put it there? You know, now there are other things growing in my yard. There's a native poinsettia that keeps coming up that I didn't put there. That is rather weedy, but it is native. Of course, the Biden's comes up that I didn't put there. That is native. Our Spanish needle beggar's tick plant has a lot of good qualities to it. But that was my first thought. Did I put it there? Do things, if I was still back in the city of Brooksville, which is like a greenhouse where everything grows, you know, I might have different thoughts, but I'm now in the Royal Highlands, which is a whole bunch of just dry, sandy soil. We're not necessarily, things just pop up easily. So it has to be very aggressive to pop up. And then I started looking up, what do the natives look like? At least some of the natives look like this Alice in Wonderland looking plant here, at least in Texas. Much smaller, you know, flowers, not near as exciting as that other one. And their native habitats, I looked those up. Stream banks, nope, that's not my house. Floodplains, not really. Bottomland, nope. Am I in the panhandle? No. Am I in these zones 5 to 8? And the bloom period is May through June. This is August. I took these pictures yesterday. So that all those things were kind of leading me to the conclusion. And Dr. Lester got his answer from the herbarium pretty quickly. And what did he say?
He said you have the invasive variety in your yard.
Right. And it is not just an annoying plant to have, it is poisonous to the caterpillar of that pipevine swallowtail. So I need to work hard on getting rid of it. I'm not going to worry about replacing it. It put itself growing up my crepe myrtle, but here are some other vines, that native again. We have the native purple passion vine and our native floral honeysuckle. It could be great replacement plants. Now here's another story I had, this asparagus fern. And we know lots of people who like to keep this in pots, don't we, Dr. Lester? And
yeah, I do have some of this in my yard out in my front hedges. I have no idea where it came from.
see, that's kind of a hint. You know,
It came with the house.
yes. So it's a category 1. That means it's a known spreader. It's been found spreading along roadsides and invading secondary forest systems. You see these berries? Who's gonna eat these berries? The birds are.
And be careful because it has thorns also. Very, very small thorns. But if you start pulling it up, you'll find the thorns.
The birds spread it. And they have found that our asparagus fern, has the potential to be similar to this guy. And he's called a climbing asparagus, with the potential to smother the forest understory and prevent regeneration of canopy species. Very interesting because I didn't look for this picture. This picture was put on a Facebook friend of mine, or someone, you know, a couple years ahead of me in high school. He used to live here. Now he's out in Los Angeles. And he is living in an apartment complex where apparently no one has bothered with landscaping in many years. And so we get to watch his chronicles of the landscaping gone wild around his apartment complex and how he's trying to get it under control. And then he put a picture of this, asked, what it was. We figured out it's this climbing asparagus, but you can see what it's doing. And this is just a small picture. It's like eating his apartment complex. And he plans in the fall to start attacking it and, trying to bringing it down. So Florida is by no means the only place, subject to these invasive plants. Hawaii has a humongous problem with it. And even, places some outside of Los Angeles is where he is. And he was very thrilled that he and his monster asparagus would be making an appearance. So hopefully we'll get to watch the progress of him tackling all these plants. But here's some replacement ideas, and really within the same family. The hybridized Foxtail Asparagus Fern. That one's pretty much okay. It doesn't get out of control, hasn't shown to get out of control at this point. And I think it's a lot more attractive, don't you, Dr. Lester?
Yeah, the invasive one really is more of a weed. I don't know of too many people who really desire or need it as a part of their landscape.
Oh, I've seen it in pots. They use it as weeping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very tough. You can't kill it. So if you're looking for a container plant that you're not going to kill, it's a good candidate.
No, it's not, because the birds are still going to get it. It's sticky, so things like squirrels can run into it and spread it around.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can use this firecracker plant. Have kind of the same kind of look, but I think it's a lot more interesting. It has these nice red flowers as well. Here's another one that's gonna make people mad, Bill, so I'll let you talk about this one.
Yeah, Nandina or heavenly bamboo was a very commonly used landscape plant in new home construction. Not so much anymore, but over the last, I would guess, 20 or 30 years, it was used a lot. So a lot of people may still have it in their landscape. It basically came with the house when they first built it and installed the landscape. This is poisonous to dogs. You have to be very careful with those berries. They are poisonous.
Yes,
and it spreads. The berries are eaten by birds and spread. So it has become, over the years, an invasive. It's a good example of how sometimes something is used, and when it gets overused and time goes by and it starts to get loose in natural environments, we come to the conclusion that it's invasive, and it just becomes more invasive over time. There are some newer cultivars that they say are safe to use. They're not going to spread as easily or as quickly. Another landscape plant that's never really honestly been one of my favorites, although I know a lot of people have it.
Right. Yeah, it is very popular. And it has been implicated, I guess it hasn't really been proven, but a lot of people believe, because when I first heard that the berries could be poisonous to birds, my first thoughts were, what kind of birds are going to eat, poisonous berries? Well, cedar waxwings. Ask any blueberry farmer. They come in and voraciously eat every berry they find. They're going to do the same thing to these heavenly bamboos, these nandinas. And so they have a buildup of the cyanide from the berries. And, they have die-off of massive amounts of cedar waxwings. So if for no other reason, if you don't want to poison the birds, or you're worried about your dogs or anything else, I am not certain if these cultivars, I would assume these new cultivars do not have berries, to avoid the spreading and any other issues. But I would look into that before I bought any.
Yeah, because the clump will physically grow and spread a little bit, but not terribly. This spreads mostly through the berries, moving far and wide, and now you start more plants, down the road. Yeah, I've never really seen a clump start to grow underground or go crazy and spread.
My church that I attend just recently had a safety evaluation from the sheriff's department. One of the recommendations were to make a lot of the shrubs smaller, around the building so people can't hide. And I haven't said it out loud yet. They don't know, but any of the shrubs that happen to be this Nandina, which there are quite a few, yeah, they're just gonna go away. So they won't be a problem to hide behind. Here's some replacement ideas for that Nandina. I love the fire bush, and it's going to attract, this wonderful bumblebee there who's getting his fill. Hummingbirds love the fire bush. You want to get the Hemilia potens if you're particular about getting the native, or this non-native Loropetalum. Does a great job being a nice bush in your landscape. If you get the variety that's called Plum Delight, it has dark purple leaves, even when it doesn't have these pretty flowers. Just a good shrub to have around. We're getting into trees, so I'm going to let our newly certified arborist discuss these invasive trees.
Okay, camphor trees are very common here in Hernando County. I know they're very common in Spring Hill. It's a very common front yard tree. A lot of people have them. They are invasive though. They came from Eastern Asia. People like them because they're relatively fast growing for a tree. They can be problematic as a tree, even just not even keeping in mind that they're invasive. When you plant them, they tend to, if you look at them, they tend to make a lot of codominant stems. So one tree will have several great big trunks that come up, and during a storm, those trunks can split and fall apart, and one can hit your driveway, the other one can hit your neighbor's house. They tend to be a very brittle, twiggy tree, so they're very messy also. Anybody who has a camphor tree, certain times of the year, is dropping twigs, it's dropping leaves. It does flower. It has a very small, inconspicuous flower, but it does make little black berries that get all over the place, and they make little black stains. That's the problem. They make berries. Once again, birds eat the berries. They take them far and wide, and when they poop, they spread the seeds and spread the tree. If you go on a hike in any one of our county parks, you're going to find non-native invasive camphor trees that have somehow found their way there. After they get large, it's very, very difficult for people who manage the parks or Florida forestry to go out there and really cut them down. So, and like the slide here says, mature trees, and I know we have a lot of them here right in Spring Hill, can produce up to 100,000 seeds per year. So they're prolific, they spread far and wide. They're not really beneficial to native wildlife at all, other than, the berries being eaten by birds. They're not poisonous. I'm not sure how nutritious they are. Our native birds could get by just fine without these berries, but this
They
is one
don't
of
cough.
the many problem trees that we have here.
They don't cough after they eat these berries, though.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very easy to tell if you have a camphor tree. If you take a leaf and you break it in half and rub it a little bit, it smells like Vicks menthol, the Vicks stuff that you rub on if you have congestion.
Yeah, it has medicinal value, but
Yeah. I don't really know of anybody who actually uses the leaves
the
or the parts of
tree,
the tree
yeah.
for that, but you could.
Here's some replacement ideas. A persimmon is a native tree. It's going to be a much better idea for you, as well as a live oak. If you have, some of these camphor trees get, as big as our live
They
oak.
get very large, yes.
Yeah. And but what I'm showing you here in this live oak is obviously this is a nursery produced live oak. It's a clonal live oak. And that is, we love our old live oaks with character in the woods, but if you're looking for something in your yard, you want something that's going to stay a decent shape, be a good, healthy tree for you. So you want to look for nurseries for some of these that have been reproduced as clones to have the good features to be a landscape plant.
Yeah, and a live oak is going to be a safer choice because you can see in that picture that has just one single trunk going up the middle. So over the years, that is going to be a safer tree than camphors, which almost always have multiple trunks and become dangerous when they get very, very large.
And I think if everyone admits it, anybody who's mowing knows they are mowing down millions of little baby camphors when
Yep.
they're mowing. Here's one of your favorites, the golden rain tree.
We have a bunch of those in our neighborhood, and those are the trees that get the yellow and then salmon colored flower petals on them in the fall, usually September-ish.
Yeah, anytime, yeah,
Yeah.
start soon. And so people get very excited because it looks like fall.
Oh my gosh, everybody is on Facebook saying, what are those beautiful trees and where do I get one? You don't want one because golden rain trees are very, very messy. They drop twigs and flowers and junk all over your yard year round. They get very large over time. They're also very twiggy and not the sturdiest and most stable tree when they get older. All the empty lots here in Spring Hill have golden rain trees along with a variety of other invasive trees. Each one of those little colored flowers, the colored part is not a leaf, it's a petal. So if you open it up, there's a couple seeds inside of it. This thing will drop millions of seeds. They go all over the neighborhood, and they are very, very attractive to Jadera bugs, which you see on the picture on the left. This is a very small insect. It doesn't bite, it doesn't hurt you or your house. All they do is they eat the seeds that these trees create and drop all over the place. If you have a golden rain tree, you will have millions of Jadera bugs in the spring. And people will call and send pictures and they're in a panic because there are literally 5 million bugs on the wall of their garage. They're, oh, what do I do? What do I spray? If you get rid of the tree, after a couple of years, the bugs will be gone. So if you have a golden rain tree, you're going to have these bugs. No tree, probably no bugs. If your neighbor has a tree, my neighbor across the street had a golden rain tree. I have them popping up in my front flower bed because the seeds spread far and wide. And I get a few Jadera bugs every spring. I think they're interesting. I'm not afraid of them. I don't go into a panic over those things. But you really don't want this one. A lot of people think it's a good idea and they want one. Don't do it. You're going to regret it.
All right. Some replacement ideas to give you kind of the fall look, if that's what you're looking for, is a fall look. We have a red maple, native red maple here in Florida. It's going to need a wet area, but it can grow okay in some of the drier areas. And sweet gums, I used to think, I never saw anybody plant a sweet gum. They just occurred naturally, but they're becoming a popular plant that they're putting in new homes and that you know, they're selling in nurseries. I don't have the tree, I just have the leaf here to show you, you know, it's pretty fall color, but it's the one that has those, what my nephew when he was 3 used to call ouchie balls.
Yeah, the little sticky spine balls. Most
Yeah.
people don't really like them in the landscape because of that. It's a fantastic forest tree, grows really well here, grows very, very large also. I've seen some huge ones.
But both of these will give you that kind of fall feeling. Here's another one for you, Dr. Lester, the Chinese tallow tree.
This is another tree that was initially imported, seemed like a good idea at the time, introduced before 1800, but then we realized that it wasn't such a good idea after we brought it here. These things flower, they set seeds, they spread far and wide, they'll pop up all over your yard. They are really brittle and twiggy. If you have a large one and we have a hurricane, it will break all the branches on the tree and they will all blow down on your house, your car, your porch, everything else. And then just the busted up trunk will resprout and grow back. So very dangerous tree, very, very messy tree. They do have a beneficial insect that they've released, and I'm not even sure exactly what it is. So they're working on controlling this tree,
Hmm.
but it's another one that if you do have one in your yard, chances are you didn't plant it. It just popped up one day. If you have them and they popped up, you really probably want to get rid of it.
And it is actually on the Florida noxious weed list, so you can't buy, sell, or transport it, but it puts itself lots of places. And again, I'm back to, because I know why people want to keep that, they also call it a popcorn tree.
Yeah, yeah.
After it does this, it has like little white flowers that look like popcorn. I've had people tell me they won't get rid of it because it brings them fall color. If you're looking for fall color, we do have our maples, you know, the Florida.
Tell you what, we have a strong enough winds. It's going to bring them a lot more than fall color. It's going to bring a
Right.
huge mess.
Right. So go with the native. Here's a very pretty tree, a mimosa tree.
Yes, mimosa trees. They are also invasive. They are pretty. They get the little flowers that are pink and white. Now, if you have a tree that looks like this, but its flowers are like a little round cotton ball and they're all white, that's a white lead tree. And that's invasive also. And we do have an ordinance against having white lead trees growing on your property here in Hernando County. So code enforcement, if they notice it, may discuss it with you. So this is a Category 1 invasive tree. It was brought here from China because it is attractive. It does have pretty flowers. I know that we have native trees that are very, very similar to this same type of flower?
Maybe in South Florida. I don't think up here.
Yeah, I know here. I've noticed some, but not huge amounts. The problem is this tree is technically a member of the bean family. So when it flowers, it sets seed pods with several seeds in it. When the seed pod falls and hits the ground, it breaks open. They create and produce huge amounts of seeds, very, very prolific reseeding. So this is another one of those trees that if you do have one, you will have literally millions of little seedlings popping up around it. And if it's next to the woods, it spreads very, very quickly far and wide. So like the slide says, it could be a serious problem along any kind of waterway, because keep in mind, water is another way that seeds and pods and things like that could be spread from one place to another.
Here's some ideas.
Might seem like a good idea, probably want to get rid of it.
Right. Replacement ideas. I know you're not a huge fan of bringing red buds here. You don't think they do that well.
We are on the very, very edge of red bud world. Just north of here, they grow great. Gainesville, you can grow them just fine. South of here, you probably really don't see any at all. Maybe the rare occasional one or two. Here, it's a roll of the dice, 50-50 chance that the tree is going to take and do well.
Although not bringing you the same colors, but certainly delightful, then is our Chickasaw Plum, which does.
They do very well here.
Yes, and they're both native plants. So before you talk about this Australian pine, Dr. Lester, let's see if we can play a game. Do you see a person in my picture here?
I see something in the middle there, yeah.
Can you, I'll give you a hint, it's one of your master gardeners. Can you tell me which one?
No.
She's bent over. Here's her hat.
Oh, okay.
Arm. We were picking up trash for coastal cleanup. That was Zarina. So I just use this to point out the great thickets that Australian pine trees create, and I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, it's a funny name because I'm pretty sure with Australian pine, it's not from Australia and it's not technically a pine tree.
Exactly.
So, but it looks like a pine tree. And we do have them here in Hernando County, mostly along the coast and not an awful lot. Other counties have a lot more than what we have. It is a highly invasive Category 1 invasive tree. It's very salt tolerant. So you can see them growing on the coast right up to the, reasonable edge of the water. You know, they can't sit in salt water, but it's very salt tolerant, very fast growing. They spread, they get really, really thick. You can, if you want to make like a little kid's fort or hide your car or something like that, if you know, you can literally get lost in a patch of Australian pines. They get very, very tall also, and they're very brittle. During storms, oh my gosh, they all snap, they fall down, they make a gargantuan mess. And this is on the state noxious weed list. It may seem like a good choice for a windbreak or some kind of visual barrier. You don't want to look at your neighbor's backyard. Very, very, very bad choice. I've never seen them sold anywhere. I'm not sure how people got a hold of them. I think a lot of them, the patches have been there for a number of years at this point.
They were planted like in the 40s, 50s, 60s. I know that some
Yeah,
people,
probably for a windbreak.
sure, and they would grow up, like people who grew up in Pinellas County would tell me it was so beautiful to sit on the beach and, you know, picnic under them. They're beautiful. You can see them along shoreline going into Arapika. There's like along the curves, the group of them. I'm
Yeah.
not saying they're not pretty, but they are very invasive and they're very weak, like you said, but their root structure is so incredibly shallow. So that's how it disturbs the nests of turtles and the American crocodile, is because it spreads far and wide and, you know, takes over the area of sand where these would try to be nesting. And then when they fall, they bring all that up with them when they fall.
Yeah, and I think they do create monocultures because where you see a patch of them, there's really nothing else growing.
Right. So a good replacement idea is our good old native bald cypress. You know, I think would be a beautiful replacement if you're looking, you know, like you said, well, I don't want to see my neighbors. Well, bald cypress will grow in water or not in water in dry areas. It'd be a great idea for a replacement. Now let's talk about the China berry.
Yeah, I didn't know if you're going to have China berry in here also.
Yeah.
My neighbor used to have China berry trees also, and they're in pretty much every empty lot in my neighborhood here in Spring Hill. They are poisonous to livestock also. So you want to check into that. You don't ever want one of these to pop up or start growing in your pasture. It was brought here as an ornamental tree. I'm not really sure what kind of medicinal value it has. It flowers, and it's very pretty when it flowers in the spring, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It makes lots and lots of red berries. And that's how it gets spread so easily. And if you see a common theme here, invasive plants that make a berry that's eaten by a bird spread far and wide. There's no way you can contain it unless you put up bird netting or something and keep the birds completely off of it, which you're probably not going to be successful doing. That's another twiggy species. It's very messy. Just a very, very bad choice. I don't really know too many people that would plant a China berry on purpose. One of those things that it pops up in your yard, or maybe it came with the house and you don't know where it came from. Trust me, nobody planted it. It just popped up on its own.
And winged elm, I think, would be a great substitute for it. This is just an up close of, if you have a winged elm and you have this on your branches, that's perfectly normal. That's why it's called a winged elm, and it makes a very nice, attractive tree. And some suggestions for the sugar maple. Again, I think we are at its southernmost range if you want to try.
Yeah, they're here. And you even see a couple of silver maples here in Hernando County. Very, very few. We're at the very edge.
So we touched on this before. You might be very aggravated to say, well, then some of these plants, not all of these, only a few of these were on the you can't buy, sell, or transport list. They're available in the garden center, and that might be very aggravating to you. Now, just remember, like we said, that FISC is a watchdog group, not a lawmaking entity. many factors come into, it's a process to outlaw plants, including how it affects each individual community, because something that might be very invasive, you know, 50 miles away from you may not be where you are. I know like Sanibel Island has like 3 or 4 plants that they do not allow in their community. I can't remember the list of them, but you know, and some municipalities make those rules. But so it depends on how far widespread the problem is. And of course, you know, you don't want to do anything in a hurry that would economically impact the horticulture industry. So you have all these factors coming into play. So the big thing to do is to be an informed consumer. And that's what you're here to do. If people stop buying it, then they'll stop producing it. Now I'll let Dr. Lester be the one to talk about, we have these things, they're already in our yard. I have this this calico vine in my yard. What do I do to get rid of it?
It is kind of plant specific. Some of these plants are going to be easier to get rid of if you have them in your yard than others. Many of the smaller flowering plants, like for example, lantana, you can just pull up, wear gloves and wash your hands afterwards because it is poisonous. But you can pull them up, go out there and keep double checking, because if any of the berries fell off or any of the seeds are in the ground, you may get more that come up in the future. So diligence is very important. Many of them, it's going to take, like Lily said, with the Mexican Petunia, and I've read other people that have gotten rid of patches of it. They say it'll take a couple of years. You go out there and dig them all up, and a few more will come up. If you are diligent and keep after it, you will be successful. You're going to have to keep digging up the ones that come up. The more you remove, the fewer come up, and eventually that spot is clear of them. For most of these invasive trees, they tend to be very aggressive. So if you do have one in your yard, if you or somebody you hire goes out there with a chainsaw and cuts it down, with many of them, all you're going to do is just make it angry. You're going to go out there 6 weeks later, and now you have 15 sprouts that came off that stump. And oh my gosh, I used to have one, now I have 15 of them coming up. That's because they aggressively resprout from the surviving roots. For many of these trees, what you're going to have to do is cut them. And it depends on the size of the tree. If it's a seedling and it's 1 foot tall, pull it up. If it's 6 feet tall, dig it up. If it's taller than that and you're going to have to chop it off with loppers, an axe, or a chainsaw, what you're probably going to have to do is spray the stump with an herbicide. So I think everybody can see what I'm putting in the chat box here. I did look up a University of Florida publication on herbicide application techniques for woody plant control. And that tells you everything you need to know about when you cut down a tree, how to spray the stump with an herbicide. The 2 main products that are used for this is glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, and a product called triclopyr. And if you look closely, a lot of times in the directions, it tells you how to mix them for cut stump treatment. What you're going to have to do is mix an extra strong dose, and within 5 minutes after you cut that tree off, spray the stump. What happens is the stump will take the chemical into it and ideally kill the roots, and it won't pop up and come up again. If you don't do that, I think most all the trees that we covered today are going to resprout and sucker from the roots. So if you don't do that, they're going to keep coming up, and you may spend a lifetime out there clipping off little shoots and having them just come back up. One day you will win. One day that the roots in the stump will die. It may take a very, very long time, or you could use cut stump treatment to do kind of one and done and get it done. But as a general rule, diligence and scouting, just going out there and looking, and as soon as these things pop up, pulling them up. Because when they first pop up, they're only that big, and pretty much anything when it's this big, you can just pull out of the ground. When you let it get 15 feet tall, going to be a lot more work and a lot more expense.
And when you pull up that lantana, or when I take up that vine that I have, that calico vine, put it in a plastic trash bag and put it in your household trash. Don't throw it in the
I had a lantana that popped up and was growing from like the side down near the base of a palm tree. And it was between the boots. And I'm thinking, why do I have a lantana growing out of the side of my palm tree? Obviously a bird
put it
ate the
there.
berries and
Yeah.
sat in the tree and took a poop, and it landed between the boots, and there's enough debris and dirt and everything else that it was able to pop up and grow. It grew pretty big and flowered. I got pictures of it. I used it as a teachable moment.
I know, I saw it. So when we talk about these different plants, we're going to wrap up with just talking about when we plant share, and there's nothing wrong with plant sharing, but we want you to plant share responsibly, especially if you're new here. You may not have, you know, a lot of knowledge. Beware of the friendly neighbor. Beware of the friendly mother. I you know, received some, you know, some invasive plants from my mother years and years ago. No, not knowing, you know, any better. So you want to be suspicious of the following words. You hear these words are red flag words in the plant world. It came up all on its own. I have so many, I had to thin them out. That does not necessarily mean it's an invasive plant, but just feel out what they're saying. It is so easy to care for. It grows anywhere. You know, those are just kind of maybe some words you want to ask more questions about before you accept.
If it grows
those
in a
things.
pot or a hanging basket and the person says, this plant grows great, you can't kill it.
Now, Heather has asked me about bottle brush. I know that one of the bottle brushes is on one of the lists as being potentially invasive, but probably in South Florida, not up here in Central. There are many more things invasive in South Florida because things don't freeze.
Yes, University of Florida does a survey on all the different plants, and they redo it every 4 or 5 years because things change. And there are a lot of plants, the exact same plant, it's categorized as highly invasive in South Florida, potentially invasive in Central Florida, and not a problem in North Florida. That's because of the different environment. If it's something that's tropical and every winter is killed off by cold weather, it's probably not invasive up north. It's going to die every year. Right. So you have to look at the plant and also look at the area that you're growing it in.
I would say that FISC is more stringent than that IFAS assessment. If you look up IFAS assessment, you should find it. But yet, still University of Florida related is the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants. They're even more stringent. You'll find plants on there that you'll be like, what? So, you know, you do have to, sometimes, you know, each group is, you know, has different plants that maybe the other group doesn't. And you just really have to study and feel these things out, you know, as well. And I tried to put on here ones that we know, that we know, that we know, that we know. They are an invasive problem. So here are upcoming classes. We have the next 2 weeks of classes still going on, Bill.
Yes, we do.
A look at natural products for pest control. And we decided that's going to take 2 parts to cover. Then in September, I'm going to have a turf talk with Bernie on the 21st. And then at the end of September, simple steps to following Florida-friendly landscaping principles. Still have 2 rain barrel workshops a month. Just had one yesterday. Going to have a virtual one next week. They'll be repeating in September. If you are interested in, and you live in Hernando County and are interested in a rain barrel, the first step is to email me at LillyB, LILLYB hernandocounty.us. And here are our emails again, in case you have any questions. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Lester, as always, for your, very, very knowledgeable input in these matters. And Bobby lets us know that that was very interesting, and Heather says thank you. And so we thank everyone, and we will see you again next week for that class on natural products. I better get working on it very soon. Everyone, thank you, and have a wonderful Florida-friendly week.
Thanks, everyone.